Four historical temples. Part 1A. Historical events. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphnath-Paneah, which means revealer of hidden things, among other meanings. Genesis 41, verse 45. Four historic temples were built in Jerusalem: Solomon's, Zerubbabel's, Herod's, and Hadrian's. Now, Hadrian's was called a pagan temple and not built according to the basic design criteria. The first three temples were 18 stories tall. Elevator shafts were on the sides and in the rear tower. They were called chambers of the slaughter knives and crank-up stairs. The altar is centered in the temple amphitheater in the court before the temple. Temple construction. The first three temples were constructed within a great tri-level amphitheater centered in a Levitical city, 2,000 cubits on a side. Surrounding each four-square Levitical city were the suburbs, 4,000 cubits on a side, Numbers 35, 4 and 5. Material herein does not always show suburb measures extending 1,000 cubits on each side of the Levitical city. Exposing the fraud. Now let's examine the temple location versus the phony mount. Temple locations. On this diagram, the suburbs are not shown. On the left is the Solomonic Temple within a great amphitheater, which is also centered in the Levitical city. Suburbs, of course, would be 1,000 cubits around outside the Levitical city. The lower temple on the right is Zerubbabel's temple, and the altar before the temple is in the center, atop David's tomb. Now the temple in the upper right is Herod's temple. The altar before Herod's temple is centered therein. The temple, of course, is in one quadrant of the great amphitheater, which is centered in the Levitical city. The suburbs, of course, would be 1,000 cubits outside. Now the suburb walls, the temple locations diagram herein depicts locations of three biblical temples. From the altar before each temple to the Levitical city wall is 1,000 cubits. The width of each Levitical city is 2,000 cubits. Therefore, by visualizing an outer wall 1,000 cubits beyond the Levitical city surrounding the Solomonic Temple site, such walls fall atop segments of ancient walls discovered by archaeologists. Limitations. The suburbs double the size of each Levitical city surrounding each temple, the amphitheater centered therein. Note again, most diagrams shown herein show only the Levitical city about the temple complex. Hadrian's temple was an exception to the above. It's under the phony temple mount. It could not have complied with temple design criteria within the limited space beneath the phony temple mount. Again, the Levitical city is centered inside the suburbs. That is, the 2,000 cubits, four-square Levitical city is inside the suburbs, which double the size of the Levitical city. Numbers 35, 4 and 5. The Levitical city surrounding the temple amphitheater is foursquare. It's like the high priest's breastplate. which also has 4 rows of 3, arranged like an English waltz. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Thus we have 4 units on each side. So we have 4 rows of 3. Now the 4 times 400 cubits, the 1600 cubits, is defined in the temple scroll, column 40, verse 9, and 2 Kings 14:13. Now the 2000 cubits are Numbers 35, verse 5, Rosh Hashanah 2, verse 5, and Reuben 4, verse 8, and 5, verse 1. And the temple amphitheaters, 500 by 500 cubits, are found in Midoth 2:1 and Ezekiel 42:18-20. Here we have the suburb walls shown in red. They're outside the Levitical city, which is outside the altar before the Solomonic temple. Now here we have Zerubbabel's temple, but note again the suburb walls. And the last we have Herod's temple that wind up the 3 sets of walls here. Now they've fallen atop many ancient walls that the archaeologists have discovered. Here we have the great domed amphitheater about the temple. Solomon's, Zerubbabel's, and Herod's temples were each built inside an amphitheater, providing shelter and seating for the flock. We have 500 cubits on a side with 4 boiling courts in each corner. Rabbi Chaim Shlomo Pinney's 1875 false location of the temple amphitheater. Pinney's fraud. The Dome of the Rock was completed in 692 AD, and the Al-Aqsa Mosque was completed in 705 AD. Both are still standing upon the same mount as humanity traversed into the Lord's Day, beginning in the spring of 1996 AD. Pinney's 1875 fraud. Therefore, the Rabbi Pinney's depiction of a temple amphitheater in place of the Dome of the Rock in his 1875 artwork is a total fraud. Note again that the building on the right side of Pinney's Mount is the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and it's still there. Temple destruction. Preserving inner temples. Based on the temple design, the people within each temple collapsed each temple to prevent invaders from entering the inner temple, which in each case have been preserved. Note, in the depiction, the people on the left are destroying the temple, whereas the person standing outside on the right is holding up his hand, signaling not to destroy the temple and environs. The Madaba map, dated circa 562 AD, was found in the floor of a Byzantine church in Madaba, Jordan. The Temple Mount did not exist when this map was created. For example, the Roman East Gate, now beneath the traditional East Gate, the Muslim Gate, was confirmed to exist in 1972 AD when James Fleming went, archaeologist James Fleming went and examined matters. Now be sure and watch Part 1B for more information and photographs